When a cardiologist tells you that you have 18 to 24 months left to live, the numbers become personal. That's what happened 23 years ago. The diagnosis came with charts, with trends pointing downward, with medical certainty that there was very little time left for me. Yet here I am. The physician who delivered that verdict has long since retired. I have not. You're probably wondering what changed. Was it a miracle drug, some experimental treatment, a radical surgery? No, none of that. What saved my life wasn't found in a pharmacy or on an operating table. It was in my kitchen. And that's not metaphorical. It was literally in my kitchen, in the foods I started putting on my plate, the routines I rebuilt, and the way I began to think about my body not as something broken, but as something that still had time to heal. What I did after that diagnosis wasn't medication, it was food. 7 foods eaten consistently that rewired my biology at the cellular level. The science behind these foods is extensive, rigorous, and often contradicts what traditional medicine has told us. The human body operates on a principle that most medical training ignores. Nothing is permanent except your decision to change it. At the cellular level, your mitochondria are regenerating, your DNA is being repaired, your gut microbiome is reshaping itself based on what you consume. What we call aging is not a fixed program. It is the cumulative result of inflammatory signaling, oxidative stress, and microbial dysbiosis. All three can be reversed with precision nutrition. When you consume the wrong foods, you activate pathways that accelerate aging. Processed sugar triggers insulin resistance, which accelerates mitochondrial dysfunction and cellular senescence. Refined oils promote buildup of oxidative damage. Ultra-processed foods deplete microbial diversity, which cascades into immune dysregulation and chronic inflammation. These are not moral failings, they are biological consequences, but consequences can be reversed. The mechanism is straightforward. Foods rich in polyphenols, complex plant molecules with antioxidant properties, engage cellular pathways that reduce oxidative stress and prevent the accumulation of senescent cells. When senescent cells accumulate in tissue, aging accelerates. When you consume foods that activate nuclear factor erythroid 2 related factor 2, a transcriptional regulator that upregulates antioxidant enzyme expression, you slow this accumulation. You are not fighting aging. You are removing the fuel from its engine. The first thing I changed was the smallest thing, which seems fitting. Every morning I'd been drinking coffee with cream and 2 sugars. I stopped. Black coffee only. It sounds trivial, but it wasn't, because I finally understood why it mattered. For years, coffee was positioned as a culprit in cardiovascular disease. The claim was straightforward. Caffeine raises heart rate and blood pressure. Therefore, coffee causes heart attacks. The claim ignored the evidence entirely. A 2025 comprehensive analysis of coffee consumption and health markers found that moderate coffee intake, 3 to 5 cups daily, was associated with reduced all-cause mortality, lower cardiovascular disease risk, better metabolic function, and slower cognitive decline. The mechanism is chlorogenic acid, a powerful polyphenol that comprises approximately 7 to 10% of the dry weight of coffee beans. This compound directly scavenges reactive oxygen species through hydrogen abstraction, neutralizing the free radicals that damage DNA and cellular membranes. Chlorogenic acid crosses the blood-brain barrier, protecting neuronal tissue from oxidative damage and reducing neuroinflammation. Studies have specifically examined the dose-response relationship. At intakes below 2 cups daily, benefits plateau. At intakes above 5 cups daily, they plateau as well. The sweet spot, 3 to 5 cups, corresponds to chlorogenic acid concentrations that activate NRF2-dependent antioxidant pathways without overwhelming the body's capacity to regulate caffeine metabolism. The catch is critical. Sugar negates these benefits. A single tablespoon of sugar in coffee triggers an inflammatory cascade that lasts hours, spiking insulin and activating something that initiates inflammatory gene expression. Black coffee only delivers the benefit. I started drinking one cup at 6 a.m., another at 10 a.m., sometimes a third at 2 p.m. I made it a ritual. I didn't rush it. And for the first time in decades, I felt like I was doing something for my body instead of just accepting its slow deterioration. A week into the coffee ritual, I bought a handful of blueberries. It sounds stupid in retrospect, but at the time, I didn't eat fruit. Fruit had sugar. Sugar was bad. I was trapped in the binary thinking of someone who'd read too many diet books. Fruit contains sugar. I had been told to avoid sugar. But this was binary thinking from someone trained on decades of oversimplified nutrition guidance. The sugar in berries is fundamentally different from table sugar because it exists in a matrix of fiber, water, and hundreds of bioactive compounds. Primary among these compounds are anthocyanins and proanthocyanidins, polyphenols responsible for the blue, red, and black colors of berries. These compounds do not simply provide antioxidant activity, they modulate cellular gene expression directly. Research at the intersection of aging biology and nutrition demonstrates that blueberry polyphenols increase lifespan in Caenorhabditis elegans through heat stress resistance activation and slowing of aging-related cognitive decline. The active compounds include epicatechin and proanthocyanidin oligomers, which increase the expression of SOD, superoxide dismutase and catalase, the two primary intracellular enzymes that convert dangerous superoxide radicals into water and oxygen. In aging mice, dietary berry supplementation resulted in enhanced signal pathways involved in energy homeostasis, antioxidant defense, and mitochondrial biogenesis, including stimulation of sirtuins, NAD-dependent deacetylases that directly regulate cellular aging processes. The polyphenols in berries activate AMPK, AMP-activated protein kinase, the cellular energy sensor that tells your body nutrients are scarce, conserve energy, and repair damage. This is the same pathway activated by caloric restriction and exercise. A handful of berries daily can partially mimic these beneficial states. I started eating a handful of berries daily. Blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, it didn't matter. I'd add them to yogurt, eat them plain, and throw them in smoothies. The point was consistency, and within 3 months I noticed something. My joints hurt less, my skin looked clearer, my energy was more stable throughout the day. At 61, I was terrified, not of death, that was abstract. I was terrified of losing my mind. My father had Alzheimer's in his 70s. Early onset dementia ran on my mother's side. I couldn't control my genes, but I could control what I ate. That's when I started eating fatty fish. The fear of mercury in fish has driven millions of people away from precisely the foods their brains need to survive aging. This fear is disproportionate to actual risk. The structural basis of your brain tissue is lipid. 60% of your brain's dry weight is fat. If you do not consume EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, and DHA, docosahexaenoic acid, the long-chain omega-3 fatty acids found in cold water fish, your neurons cannot maintain their membrane integrity. The Framingham Heart Study, which has tracked cardiovascular and cognitive health across 3 generations of a single community since 1948, conducted analysis on 2,183 dementia and stroke-free participants with an average age of 46. Researchers measured red blood cell concentrations of EPA and DHA and correlated them with structural MRI markers and cognitive testing. The findings were unambiguous. Higher omega-3 index, calculated as DHA plus EPA, was associated with larger hippocampal volumes. The hippocampus is the brain structure responsible for encoding new memories and spatial navigation. Larger hippocampal volume in midlife corresponds to slower cognitive decline in aging. The mechanism involves neuronal membrane stability and anti-inflammatory signaling. EPA and DHA are incorporated into neuronal cell membranes where they modulate fluidity and facilitate the signaling across synaptic clefts. When omega-3 deficiency exists, neurons compensate by incorporating other fatty acids, saturated and trans fats from the diet, or arachidonic acid from impaired lipid metabolism, which decreases membrane fluidity and accelerates synaptic dysfunction. Additionally, EPA and DHA are substrates for specialized pro-resolving mediators, SPMs, molecules that actively halt inflammatory signaling rather than merely dampening it. In the brain, chronic neuroinflammation is the pathway to neurodegeneration. Omega-3 fatty acids don't reduce inflammation passively. They actively signal immune cells to stop producing inflammatory cytokines. Epidemiological data shows that populations consuming fatty fish regularly have cardiovascular mortality rates approximately 20% lower than those consuming fish less than once per week. This persists across age groups and baseline health status. I ate salmon twice a week, sardines from a can when I was lazy, mackerel when I could find it. The beauty of fish is that you don't need expensive supplements. Real food delivers these compounds in their bioactive form, surrounded by cofactors that enhance absorption. 3 years later, I had an MRI for an unrelated reason. My neurologist said, "Your brain looks like a 60-year-old's, not an 80-year-old's." I was 73 then. This was the hardest mental shift because I'd spent 30 years believing that egg yolks were slowly killing me. Cholesterol was the enemy. The yolk was the problem. I'd eaten egg whites and felt righteous about it. Then I read the actual research. For 50 years, eggs were positioned as a threat to cardiovascular health because of their cholesterol content. This was arguably the most consequential nutritional error of modern medicine. Dietary cholesterol has a negligible impact on serum cholesterol in most individuals. The liver tightly regulates cholesterol synthesis, while egg yolks contain compounds that directly protect the brain and support optimal lipid metabolism. An egg yolk contains 144 milligrams of choline, a micronutrient classified as essential by the National Academy of Medicine. Choline is the precursor to acetylcholine, the neurotransmitter critical for attention, learning, and memory consolidation. It is also the precursor to phosphatidylcholine, a primary structural component of neuronal membranes. Pregnant women supplemented with choline at double the adequate intake, 930 milligrams daily, gave birth to infants with faster information processing speed at 4 to 13 months and improved sustained attention at 7 years compared to those supplemented at the standard adequate intake of 480 milligrams daily. Additionally, egg yolks contain lutein and zeaxanthin, xanthophyll carotenoids that accumulate in the macula of the retina and slow age-related macular degeneration, the leading cause of blindness in people over age 65. Whole egg consumption compared to yolk-free egg substitutes raised plasma lutein and zeaxanthin concentrations by a factor of 2 to 3 in controlled dietary trials. The cardiovascular methodology requires examination. Systematic reviews of randomized controlled trials examining egg consumption and blood lipid markers found that while total cholesterol and LDL cholesterol increased modestly by 5.5 to 8.1 milligrams per deciliter, HDL cholesterol increased proportionally, such that the cardiovascular risk ratio, total cholesterol to HDL ratio, remained unchanged or improved. Critically, observational studies of egg consumption and cardiovascular events found null associations in populations without pre-existing diabetes. In healthy populations eating up to 7 eggs per week, no increased cardiovascular event risk was detected. I started eating 2 eggs every morning, whole eggs, yolk and all, fried in butter or boiled or in an omelet. The method didn't matter as much as consistency. Within 6 months, my LDL cholesterol had gone down while my HDL went up. My eye health improved, my energy was more stable, and my cognitive function kept improving. If you put me in an fMRI scanner during that period, I bet you would have seen increased activation in areas associated with attention and memory. This was the second mental mountain I had to climb because the medical establishment had demonized red meat almost as much as egg yolks. Red meat causes heart disease. Red meat causes cancer. Red meat is pro-inflammatory. But again, when I looked at the actual science, it wasn't red meat that was the problem. It was processed red meat consumed without attention to sourcing and eaten in excessive quantities by people with sedentary lifestyles and poor overall nutrition. Red meat consumption has been widely demonized as a cardiovascular risk factor. This claim conflates processed red meat, which contains sodium nitrite and phosphate additives that impair endothelial function, with whole muscle red meat from grass-fed cattle. The distinction is crucial and ignored in most dietary guidance. A 100-gram serving of grass-fed beef provides up to 2.6 milligrams of highly bioavailable heme iron, the form of iron that the body absorbs with 60 to 30% efficiency, compared to approximately 5% absorption for plant-based non-heme iron. This iron is essential for hemoglobin synthesis and oxygen transport. Red meat also provides creatine, a compound that accumulates in muscle and brain tissue and serves as a phosphate buffer for ATP synthesis, the cellular energy currency. In aging populations, creatine supplementation alone has been shown to preserve muscle mass and strength independent of exercise. Grass-fed beef contains carnitine, an amino acid derivative that shuttles fatty acids into mitochondria for V-oxidation. In the context of age-related metabolic decline, this transport is increasingly impaired. Red meat restores this capacity. The ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids in grass-fed beef is approximately 1.2 compared to 120 in grain-fed beef. This matters because dietary omega-6 in excess promotes arachidonic acid accumulation, which is the substrate for pro-inflammatory eicosanoid synthesis. Studies of Spanish and Japanese populations with high red meat consumption despite cardiovascular health show that the distinction between processed and unprocessed sources determines risk profile entirely. When analyses account for processing and saturated fat content, the cardiovascular signal disappears. After my father had a stroke at 72, weakness became something I monitored obsessively. I didn't want to become frail. I didn't want to lose the ability to walk upstairs without losing my breath, or to carry groceries, or to feel strong in my own body. Red meat, specifically grass-fed beef eaten twice a week, addressed that. Within a year of adding it back to my diet, my muscle mass increased, my strength tests improved, my bone density scan showed stabilization where there had previously been decline. I wasn't getting younger, but I was getting stronger, and there's a difference. Around this same time, maybe 3 years into this reinvention, I learned something that reframed everything. Your gut microbiome isn't just about digestion, it's a second brain, an entire ecosystem that communicates with your central nervous system, regulates your immune system, influences your mood, and either contributes to or protects against aging. That's when I started eating fermented foods intentionally. Sauerkraut, kimchi, kombucha, kefir, tempeh, miso, foods that are alive with beneficial bacteria. These foods don't just contain probiotics, they contain the metabolic byproducts of fermentation: short-chain fatty acids, vitamin K2, bioavailable minerals, and compounds that feed your own indigenous gut bacteria. The research here is elegant. When people consume a diet rich in fermented foods, their gut microbiome diversity increases. This diversity is a marker of longevity. The more diverse your microbial ecosystem, the more resilient your immune system and the lower your inflammatory burden. I added a small serving of sauerkraut or kimchi to almost every meal. It became automatic, and within a few months my digestion improved. No more bloating, no more afternoon energy crashes. My mood became more stable. My seasonal allergies, which had plagued me for years, almost entirely resolved. Looking back, this makes sense. Much of your immune system lives in your gut. When your gut microbiome is rich and diverse, your immune system is educated and balanced. When it's depleted, which happens with antibiotics, processed food, and chronic stress, your immune system becomes either overactive autoimmune disease, allergies, or underactive chronic infection, cancer risk. And then there's cacao, raw, unsweetened cacao powder. This was the hardest one to introduce because it tastes like dirt mixed with magic, as someone once put it. But cacao contains PQQ, pyrroloquinoline quinone, a compound that signals your cells to generate new mitochondria, the energy factories of your cells. Mitochondrial function declines with age. Your cells produce less ATP, energy, and aging accelerates. PQQ reverses this process, at least to some degree. A single spoonful of raw cacao daily, I mixed mine into my morning coffee, was like giving my cells permission to keep working. I can't measure this one as easily as muscle mass or brain MRI, but I felt it. My sustained energy improved. My recovery from exercise improved. At 75, I could hike for hours without the overwhelming fatigue that had started creeping in at 68. Here's where my story diverges from what modern medicine wants to discuss. Because I did all of these things, the coffee, the berries, the fish, the eggs, the red meat, the fermented foods, the cacao, but there was something else, something that might have mattered more than any of it. When that cardiologist told me I was dying, something shifted in me. It wasn't hope, exactly. It was more like defiance. I'd spent 40 years following the rules, eating what I was told, taking what I was prescribed, trusting authority, and look where it got me. Sick, overweight, on 5 medications, told I had 2 years left. I couldn't control my genes. I couldn't control that my father had had a stroke or that my mother's mind had deteriorated, but I could control what I did every day, and I made the decision that I was going to live, not just exist, live. That meant something different for each day. It meant saying no to obligations that drained me. It meant spending more time with people I loved and less time with people I didn't. It meant doing things that terrified me, traveling alone, learning new skills, putting myself in situations where I had to be present. It meant managing my stress. Chronic stress is one of the most underrated accelerants of aging. When you live in a state of high alert, when your cortisol stays elevated, inflammation becomes chronic. Your brain shrinks. Your immune system becomes dysregulated. Your cardiovascular system deteriorates. Studies have shown that high cortisol alone can reduce life expectancy, independent of any disease. But here's the beautiful part: stress-induced aging can be reversed. Not overnight, but measurably. When people reduce their stress, when they stop the chronic rumination, when they rebuild social connections, when they find meaning, their biological age actually decreases. I didn't use that language then. I just knew that I needed to laugh more, worry less, and stop treating my life like I was waiting for it to end. 23 years after that death sentence, I'm 83. I've had no major health events. My medications have been reduced from 5 to 1 low-dose aspirin. My blood work looks like someone 20 years younger. My mind is sharp. My body is strong. I climb stairs without getting winded. I take cold swims. I travel. I love. I work. The doctor who predicted my death is long retired. I've outlived several physicians who were younger than me at the time. But here's what I want you to understand. I'm not special. I didn't have better genes than my father. I didn't have access to secret treatments. I didn't get lucky. What I did was I took responsibility for something I actually had control over: what I ate, how I moved, whether I slept, and what I decided to think about. Medicine wants to pretend that aging is a disease that only medicine can treat, that longevity is determined by your genes and your drugs. But the truth is uglier and more empowering than that. Most of us are dying by our choices, not by our chromosomes. When my cardiologist told me I'd die in 2 years, he wasn't wrong about the trajectory I was on. He was just extrapolating from the way I was living. And when I changed the way I was living, fundamentally, consistently, without compromise, the trajectory changed. The foods I've described: coffee, berries, fatty fish, eggs, red meat, fermented foods, cacao, they're not magic. They're not superfoods. They're just whole foods, foods that your great-grandparents ate, foods that contain the molecules your body was designed to use. And when you consume them consistently, your body remembers how to live instead of how to slowly die. If you're going to do anything with this, here it is. Start with coffee. Tomorrow morning, drink your coffee black. No sugar, no cream. If you like it, drink it again the next day. Then add berries, a handful, any kind, every day. Then add fish, twice a week, that's it. Then add eggs. 2 for breakfast, however you like them. Then add red meat, a small portion, twice a week. Then add fermented food, sauerkraut, kimchi, yogurt, kefir, something with live cultures, a small amount every day. Then add cacao, a teaspoon in your coffee every morning. And then, this is the important part, examine your life. What's stressing you that doesn't need to stress you? What relationships are draining you? What would you do if you had 20 years instead of 2? Because that's the real intervention. I was told I'd die at 60. I refused to believe it and I didn't. You have the same power. On.